There could be a widespread rail strike happening this Friday, and it could bring 40% of freight in the U.S. to a grinding halt. Unions are negotiating contracts with major U.S. railway operators. The union workers want salary increases and back pay for hours worked since 2020. A prolonged strike could lead to empty shelves in stores, temporary closures at factories, and higher prices of consumer goods. Railroad workers are under a different labor law than the one that controls labor relations at most businesses. That means it's possible Congress could act to prevent or quickly stop a strike. And here to talk about the potential strike is Mark Mix. He's the president of the National Right to Work Foundation. Here he is. Mark, thanks for your time this afternoon. So rail workers are threatening of a strike. Very simple question. Let me ask you, what has led to this point?
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity to talk about this. This is a big story, and if at 12:01 a.m. comes around on Friday, September 16th, and the railroad shut down in this country, it's going to be a real problem. Some estimate it'll cost about $2 billion a day to the economy, let alone the damage to some perishable agricultural goods that are kind of at the heightened season, like the grain harvest out in the Midwest. But yeah, here's what's happening. This started, this is a contract negotiation that's been going on since late 2019, early 2020, and basically covers 12 unions covering roughly 140,000 railway employees, across the country, and primarily with 7 Class 1 railroads that operate across the entire nation. And so this has been going on for years, and obviously we've come to a point where it's come to a head. We've had a presidential emergency board commissioned by President Joe Biden appointing 3 arbiters to basically come in and make a recommendation that's not binding to the railroad and to the unions, but it's something that is out there on the table. That happened back in July. In August, the Presidential Emergency Board came through with recommendations that basically set the stage for what is a 24% increase in wages across the board to all the employees covered by this union agreement. Right now, 8 of the 12 unions have come to basically tentative agreements. They haven't been voted on by the employees yet, but have come to tentative agreements with the carriers. But there are 4 major unions still left out there, 2 really big unions left out there that have yet to agree. And so if we get to Friday morning at 12:01 a.m. and these 2 largest unions call on their workers to go on strike, we anticipate that the rest of the union movement will honor that picket line and the railroads will probably shut down come Friday morning.
Yeah, like you said, it's a big story, but do you think that will happen? Do you think an agreement will be made before then?
Well, back in the early 1990s, there was a couple of days where the railroad shut down. But here's what can happen. Basically, if they think that a strike is going to come, Congress can step in and they can prohibit a strike or a lockout through congressional action. The unions are actually arguing that they don't want Congress involved. They want to keep the pressure on the railroads to come to the table and finish the negotiations by Friday morning or by late Thursday night, obviously. I think there's a possibility that there'll be a strike. I think there's a possibility it'll be a couple of days. But obviously, with the damage, the potential damage done to the economy, I think that politicians, the unions, and the railroad carriers are going to have to come to the table very quickly and get to an agreement. Any kind of extended strike, like we might see on the docks and the ports across the country, particularly on the West Coast right now, where there's contract negotiations going on there and 29 ports on the West Coast of America, and there's been no settlement for a contract that expired on June 30th. But Lord knows, if we have a strike on the ports and a strike on the railroads across the country, it's a real problem. So I think the politicians probably, with November elections coming up, will probably have to step in relatively quickly and get this all settled out.
But that would require a level of bipartisanship in Washington that's kind of rare, right? So do you think Congress will actually step in? Well,
one thing we know about politicians is that they get more in tune with the electorate when Novembers and elections come around. So it's possible there'll be more bipartisanship when they think their political careers might be in danger if the railroads go on strike or if the railroad unions go on strike and basic supplies can't be delivered and farmers and agricultural producers in the Midwest can't get their products to market. I mean, there's lots of ramifications here. And so the politics will become much more kind of intense, if you will, as we're now in this election cycle that leads up to November.
Okay. Now, another thing, you talked about this a little bit, but if a strike does happen, what kind of scale are we looking at and how long do you think it could last?
Well, I think a strike for the railways across America would be devastating and shut down the entire system. Basically, there are 30 railroads that are involved in this negotiation. The 7 Class 1 railroads are the primary movers of products and goods across the country in our rail system. Hopefully there won't be a strike. Hopefully there'll be an agreement. I mean, we know that the eight unions that have already proposed tentative agreements to their memberships are going to get a 24% increase compounded that'll be in effect from 2020 to 2024. It will include an annual $1,000 immediate bonus. It basically translates into about $11,100 check for railroad workers right now if they accept this agreement. Obviously, the 2 big unions that are still out there, the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineer and Trainmen, and then the Sheet Metal Workers, the Air and Rail Transportation Division are the 2 big unions. Those are the engineers on the trains that are moving the product. So I think they're going to have to settle, but we'll see. Hopefully the strike will be, hopefully there won't be one, and if there is, it will be very short.
All right, that's good to hear. But who do you feel has the upper hand right now, the unions or the railroad operators?
Well, I think it's kind of a mixed bag right now. The railroad operators have to be very concerned about cargo that's being put into trains right now, whether it be trailer vans or whether it be a consist of tankers and agricultural goods and boxcars. They need to be concerned about putting these trains out into the system, and then if there's a shutdown, those trains just get stopped, frankly, and those products they're sitting out there and they're not moving. That's a problem when you have hazardous materials and other things that are loaded onto these trains. I mean, for the railway unions, I mean, obviously going on strike is difficult because there's a certain number of workers that disagree with the position that the railway union officials are taking. In fact, some polling indicates that, 96 or 97% of the workers are ready to go out on strike. But under the Railway Labor Act, which passed in 1926 with amendments in 1933 and 1936, I mean, these are antiquated laws that deal with a railroad system that was completely different way back then. But yet these labor laws have applied all the way to today. So there's a lot going on here. I think the unions have a lot at stake. The railroads have a lot at stake. But you know who has the most at stake here are the American consumer and the American economy. That's for sure.
There's one last thing for our viewers watching. Should they be worried?
Well, yeah, if the railroad system shuts down, there's a problem with supply chain. And, we've already had lots of problems with supply chains going back to COVID, and it's working its way through the system now. It hasn't completely worked its way through the system. So to add railroads onto this, I think people ought to be concerned, and they ought to let their politicians know that this is an important issue if it does come down to congressional action.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark Mix, president of the National Right to Work Foundation. Appreciate you talking with me today.
Thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.